Okay, welcome everyone to today's expert talk. A very warm welcome from the Alliance Secretariat. We are very excited to welcome Dr. Abumoghli today on faith, wildlife, and biodiversity, harnessing religion for environmental conservation, ethical action. I'm personally very excited for this topic as I think it deserves to be more present in political agendas, especially as it's touching, I think, on very different levels, on our personal level of how we see the intrinsic value of animals in our environment, but also if you look at the powerful potential that lies in faith and belief systems and religion, also when it comes to political action. I'm going to say a few words about our speaker today, Dr. Abumoghli, and then we will dive right in. Dr. Abumoghli is the director and founder of the Faith for Earth Coalition of UNEP, and he has a 40-year experience on strategic planning, sustainable development, interfaith collaboration, and innovation. He has held several roles within the United Nations, specifically UNEP and UNDP, where he was, for example, the regional representative of UNEP in West Asia. He also holds his doctoral degree in biochemical engineering, as well as an outstanding graduate of Virtual Development Academy from the John's University. And he has engaged within his academic career with several papers and books around the topic of the interplay of religion and environment, ethics, values, and spirituality in the context of environmental governance. And I'm very excited to hear your talk right now, and I wish everyone just as much fun and excitement, and I will give the floor to Dr. Abumoghli. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Anne Kristen, and of course my appreciation and gratitude to the Alliance Against Health Risks of Wildlife Trade for extending this invitation. I'm so excited that organizations such as the Alliance have started realizing the importance of engaging with faith-based organizations and the integration of religious perspectives into almost everything we do, especially on environmental governance. And when it comes to wildlife conservation, it is indeed part of the environmental governance. I would like to share a presentation, and then we can discuss and take it from there. And I would just want you to tell me if you can see it full scale, so I can start.
Yes, we can see it in presentation.
Wonderful. So the focus of this talk will be on how wildlife conservation, biodiversity is related to religious perspectives and how religions impact the way people deal with wildlife and with biodiversity in general. So let me start by just introducing myself. Anne Kristen has mentioned that I work as the director of the Faith for Earth Coalition. The coalition is part of the United Nations Environment Program, and probably most of you know that United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP, is the international organization within the UN system that is mandated to keep the environment under review and that sets the environmental agenda. And we are governed by a governing council that is called the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is composed of 193 member states. Those member states meet every 2 years and decide on the environmental global agenda and adopt resolutions and decisions concerning different aspects of the environment. The last United Nations Environment Assembly was held just a month ago, where the international community adopted 22 decisions related to environmental issues. And the theme this year was on interfaith collaboration as, our component from the faith perspective, but it was on how the global community should come together in multilateral action. So multilateralism was the theme, and we insisted as faith actors that interfaith collaboration is part of multilateral action. But what is the theory of change behind our engagement, or behind having a special program within the UN focusing on environmental issues? As you know, the three pillars for sustainable development are economy, social development, and the environment. However, if you also remember, some of you are old enough to remember that in Agenda 21, the cultural perspective or diversity was a fourth pillar of sustainable development, a main pillar, along with the three other pillars. However, when the SDGs were adopted, the cultural diversity was integrated within all of the 17 SDGs. But in SDG 17 on partnership, it says that everybody is concerned for the implementation of the SDGs. All parts of society, whether it is governments, NGOs, civil society, private sector, academia, and so on. Now, of course, when the United Nations Economic and Social Council established UNEP and talked about environmental governance, but also about anything else that the UN works on, they found that it is important to engage non-governmental organizations, and they designated 9 categories for the civil society to engage, including local communities, including NGOs, the private sector, science and technology, and so on. One of the main major civil society sectors, the religious or faith actors, have not been categorized as such as a standalone category. So we thought of we are missing a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential for engaging a major sector of society. Therefore, in 2017, I was requested to establish the engagement with faith actors, and we established the Faith for Earth Coalition. And the main reason behind that, considering the powers of the faith actors, if you think of Sundays or Fridays or Saturdays for the Abrahamic religions, but other days for other religions, with a call to a prayer, the religions can convene thousands and thousands of people, in their spiritual ceremonies, the weekly ones. So the power of convening, when it comes to, discussing issues, faith leaders can just put a call to the believers or followers, and they come and they discuss. So the power of convening is very important. But also the power of convincing, which depends on sacred scripts and centuries old backgrounds, theologies, ideologies, and so on. So when you talk to a person from a religious perspective, that person would not usually argue with the scripts. This is a divine script. This is the superpower of the creator who's saying so. So we all abide to and follow. Uh, opposite to if you have a scientist or a politician saying something, people would debate and argue and, try to get out the best of their own personal gains. So the power of convincing is very important. However, a third power is also important, which is the assets that are owned by faith-based organizations and institutions. Um, some of you know that more than 50% of educational institutions are owned by faith-based organizations. And that is at the global level. So 50% of universities, of schools, of educational centers, and so on are owned by faith-based organizations. More than 40% of healthcare centers are established and run by faith institutions. Faith institutions, according to the latest data that we have, own more than 8% of habitable land on Earth. And if you want to compare that to a size of a country, it is 36 times the size of the United Kingdom. So it's massive. And when we talk about habitable land, we talk about ecosystems, biodiversity, water channels, forests, and what have you. So it's a huge ecosystem asset that faith-based organizations own. Um, and then if you talk about faith organizations, you must talk about houses of worship like churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, gawaras, and so on. And there are 100 million or more than 100 million such or houses of worship. And of course, these houses of worship are places where they have biodiversity around them. They contribute to pollution, for example, if their water is not treated. They also contribute to positive impact when they apply sustainable practices. So the power of faith organizations cannot be overlooked and should be included when we discuss policies and strategies. And this is why when we established the Faith for Earth Coalition, we thought of three main objectives to engage faith actors on. The first one is leadership and policy impact. And as I was mentioning, there is a different way of looking at nature, at the environment, at the creation, which is inscribed in scripts and so on, that talks about environment and natural resources. So we want that perspective of religions to be integrated into the policy making. When decisions are made, the ethical and faith values should be integrated into those policies. The second one, which aligns with the massive ownership of assets of faith actors, is greening those assets. As I mentioned, ecosystems are owned by faith organizations, so ecosystem-based management should be applied in those assets. Or if we are talking about financial investments, we are talking about trillions of dollars being owned and operationed by faith organizations. So investment in fossil fuel or environmentally harmful practices should be part of their rethinking of how faith organizations sustainably integrate environmental sustainability into their management of their assets. And the third one is the connection between science and religion, because all along environmental governance and all global international meetings and conventions depend on scientific evidence. So we want the religious perspectives and the scientific evidence to work together towards making the case, towards talking about the best narrative that brings people along in the implementation of decisions and resolutions and policies in general. So we are bridging the common understanding and dissipating the false misunderstanding between religions and science. And that is all supported by the program that we have created within the UN system to engage on not only environmental issues, there is also what we call the multi or the inter-office, interagency task force on religion and development, which is composed of 22 UN organizations. So we engage faith actors in peace building, in women, gender issues, in development, and so on. So the set of UN organizations complement one another to cut across all the sustainable development goals. The coalition that we lead from UNEP is composed of 5 councils, and that will cover the whole spectrum of importance of the key players in within the faith actors. The first one is the Council of Eminent Faith Leaders, and we know that how influential faith leaders are, especially those with institutional setup, like, for example, the Vatican or the Catholic Church, like the Anglican Church, like the Sunnis with the Al-Azhar. So those are organizations or religions that are headed by some high-level faith leaders. So we bring together those high-level faith leaders to come together, agree on common issues and call to action, whether a call to action by governments or by their followers. Not only calling to action, but also engage on policy issues. For example, Pope Francis' encyclical, the Laudato Si, talks about, and recently Laudato Deum, brings in the scientific facts and scientific evidence into their perspective. So they are talking to policy makers. Similarly, we have launched Al-Mizan, Covenant for the Earth, from an Islamic perspective that integrates the scientific evidence and theories into the practical approaches of religion. So the Council of Eminent Faith Leaders is very important. We know without a doubt that the youth are not only the leaders of the future, they are the leaders of today, and their enthusiasm and collaboration and engagement, current engagement, cannot be overlooked. So we have the Faith for Earth Youth Council, which is composed now from about 32 young men and women representing all religions, and they bring not only the faith perspectives, but also the perspectives of young people. And the main purpose is to create that intergenerational dialogue between high-level faith leaders and the youth. Another council is the Women Council, the Interfaith Women Council. We know that most of the religions are patriarchal, headed by male figures, but also importantly, there are contributions from women faith leaders, and we wanted to provide that platform, leadership platform, for the engagement of women in decision-making and policy dialogue. The fourth council is the Science Religion Council. Again, as I explained before, there is an important relationship between sciences and religions. So we wanted to strengthen that and bring it about. And the final council is the Council of Faith-Based Organizations, or at least those accredited to the United Nations Environment Program. And we have around 90 of those organizations members and accredited to UNEP, and they have a seat on the table of decision making. All of that is supported by the Secretariat of the Faith for Earth program of the coalition. So what are the services that the coalition provides? As mentioned, policy advocacy, bringing the faith leaders and faith actors in engagement with policymakers during intergovernmental meetings, conventions like COPs for climate change, for biodiversity, the United Nations Environment Assembly, and so on and so forth. And the second one is on partnerships and collaboration, and we bring as conveners on specific issues to discuss the priority environmental issues within different organizations. So not only supporting faith-specific, but also interfaith collaboration and partnership in a dialogue that brings about the best of all organizations. One of the important things is that we do the science faith-based evidence and literacy. Most, if not, previously we discovered that faith actors do understand that there is a relationship between religion or their own religion and the environment, but they do not understand the depth, and they do not understand, biodiversity, climate change, climate finance, corruption and disaster risk reduction, and how it relates to religion. So we have designed and launched, whether it is online courses, we have 10 of them now on specific subjects, but also capacity building workshops and meetings and so on, to bring that to the forefront of the understanding of religious institutions. And of course, we need to tell the story, because we are not creating something new. These practices are or have been there for decades, if not centuries. So we want to bring about those case studies for how these organizations have lived in harmony with nature for that long, and how that contributes to nature-based solutions. So the most important element that brings that all of that about is the values, the ethics, the spiritual, moral responsibility, and how it impacts not only the behavior of the people, but also how it contributes to the engagement and the prosperity of the people. So let's, from that understanding and that perspective, delve into how they are related to wildlife protection. So, and scientifically, if we want to consider what the religions stand for and how that is related to scientifically the importance of protection of the wildlife, we take examples of different religions. For example, Christianity's stewardship concept aligns with the principle of conservation and the responsibility to conserve all wildlife. As for religions, it is God's creation and we are responsible for it. In Islam, for example, people, humans, are vicegerent or khalifas of God on earth. So they are responsible to keep the natural resources as they have received it from their creator. And that aligns with the concepts of wildlife and ecosystem, conservation and restoration. In Hinduism, it is the connection is even deeper, which considers all beings or all living beings are interconnected. Whatever happens to humans happens, affects the other wildlife resources and vice versa. In Buddhist, in addition to interconnectedness, and there is the compassion element of the religion, where humans are responsible for compassionately dealing with ecological resources and their impact on wildlife and their responsibility to conserve it. In Judaism, the concept of tikkun olam, which is you are responsible for repairing the world as you have received it. So there is a responsibility of restoration of wildlife. Indigenous spiritualities, and probably this is area where it has been discussed more than discussing the faith and religions, because indigenous people's contribution has been recognized by international conventions, by governments and organizations, that they have much more to contribute. They own more than 80% of biodiversity on the face of Earth, while they only represent 5% of its population. So, and there are so many practices that even Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals asked governments and contributors to learn from and implement in their conservation projects. Sikhism as well, they consider all creation as reverent, recognizing that it is the work of the divine. Now, you might think that Christianity teaches something different than Islam, Islam teaches something different than Buddhism, and so on. And well, to the surprise of some, it is not. Most of what any religion talks about in terms of the relationship between humans and wildlife is actually reflected in almost all of the other religions. So there are the concepts that are in front of you that are common between almost all religions. Stewardship and care for creation, in different forms, in different perspectives, are the same in all of the religions. Interconnectedness in Buddhism and Hinduism is the same as communities in Islam. Balance and harmony in Islam is the same as living in harmony by the Buddhists. So all of these concepts and common values of all religions, they approach the relationship between the environment, wildlife, resources, and the religion from different perspectives, different angles, but they all lead to the same result, which is living in harmony and balanced way with the natural resources. So how specifically wildlife is reflected in some of the religions? In Hinduism, for example, some of the animals are, considered as sacred manifestation of the divine. Everybody knows that they, symbolize cows as representing the motherhood, the symbols of fertility. And this is why cows are sacred to Hindus, and they have high values and high respect for that. But not only cows, but also other animals, as each one of those animals depicts or something that represents the the powers of God, but also God's wishes or the divine wishes of how to deal with wildlife. In Buddhism, for example, the concept of compassion that I talked about prevents people or us people not to be violent towards animals and the other living things. So it prevents or prohibits killing of living beings. In Judaism, again, similarly, there is a concept that is called the Za'ar Balatia Shayim, which calls for the prevention of cruelty to animals. Not only killing animals, but they are not supposed to be cruel, mistreat animals. And that goes along with the newly adopted decision by the United Nations Environment Assembly 2 years ago on the treatment of animals and how to conserve not only wild animals, but also domestic animals as well. In Christianity, there's the story of Noah and the ark, and when there was a huge, massive flood that flooded the entire earth, how God asked Noah to conserve biodiversity and wildlife by taking a pair of each of God's creation into the ark, so to conserve. So this is a direct call to humans that you're responsible to keep wildlife intact or conserve that from a divine perspective and orders. In Islam, again, Islam emphasizes that how people should treat animals, even in their practices of sacrifice when animals are slaughtered for the benefit of the poor and so on. There are certain procedures that should be followed so animals are not mistreated as a form of asking people to not be cruel to animals. Now, as I mentioned, all of the teachings, the understandings, the the traditional practices of religions are inspired by scriptures. Some of them are heavenly scriptures that are dictated by God Himself, and others are brought about by the prophets, the leaders, the wise people from their religious perspective. So specifically in scriptures and in the different books of religions, it is mentioned that the responsibility of humans. For example, in Judaism, it says specifically the virtuous person regards the life of his beast. So it's important to take care of the creation. In Christianity, for example, know well the condition of your flocks and pay attention to your herds. So specifically in Islam, it says no man kills even a sparrow or anything smaller without its deserving it, but God will question him. So there is an accountability embedded in the scriptures of how humans have been treating wildlife, and so on and so forth in other religions. Even interestingly enough, in some of the textbooks, the scripts and the holy books, animals and plants and biodiversity are mentioned by name. For example, more than 200 verses in the holy book of Quran, it mentions the animals. 6 chapters are actually titled or named after animals. There are a mention of 22 plants and their benefits to the human race. In the Bible, there is 120 names of animals, more than 110 plants. So even the holy books of the religions mention it's like the IUCN list and how important these biodiversity elements are. Now, most of the religions or all the religions consider the wildlife as sacred. Even some religions like Buddhism, for example, they consider trees as divine elements and they ordain them like priests. So this shows you how sacred these trees are, especially forests. And you have probably seen the ordination of trees in a number of places for Buddhists. There are botanical gardens emerging as representation of the creation of God. You know, you have Bible gardens, you have Quranic gardens, and you have other sanctuaries by other religions, conserving those plants and animals and what have you mentioned in their holy books. But also recently, some activities and some projects have been started for the conservation of animals and wildlife. For example, the Living Chapel, which UNEP has been part of, installed in Rome and Milan, you know, representing the sacredness of trees and water usage, but also the minimalistic approach of conserving the natural resources and environmental elements. So that is in general, this is the concept, the theological approaches of religions, their understanding. But of course, that does not or should not stop there. And we have been part of a movement that brings that understanding and that theological approach into policy making. And related to this subject is COP15 that took place in Montreal, where the Kunming-Montreal framework has been adopted. And that comes from a perspective of the necessary engagement at the policy level of faith actors, providing those perspectives. Collaboration and partnership brought about more than 50 organizations, 50 representing almost, I think, 15 religions at that time, to bring about all that different perspectives and different backgrounds. Advocacy and awareness, even international organizations and foundations now putting a lot of financial resources in promoting advocacy and awareness about the biodiversity conservation and wildlife protection. One last thing that I heard about, which we were part of in the proposal stage, is that the ICI from Germany gave $18 million for a project just to go about biodiversity advocacy and how to engage all sectors of society, or what they call the whole of society approach. And the important also part of the engagement or contributions of religious actors is the spiritual guidance and counseling, and how you know, policymakers should look at not only the cost-benefit system of biodiversity protection, but also how spiritually this is related to what people should adopt and should follow. Now, during COP15, I'm showing here only 15 of the areas of contribution of faith actors, but there were double that amount. But I just wanted to show how you know, faith actors do not only look at the you know, the surface of issues. You know, we are supposed to protect the environment and stop there. No, actually, faith actors go deep into discussing issues that are very centric in the global understanding of the biodiversity and wildlife protection and so on. So, for example, how the you know, it talks about financing, for example, financing for biodiversity protection. It talks about lifestyles, how living or the way of living, the style of living affects biodiversity and ecosystems and wildlife. You know, the ecocide law, which is, you know, something that is emerging and everybody is supporting nowadays, and so on and so forth. So my main point here is that it's not, you know, anymore that faith actors are at the margins of policy making, but also they bring their own scientists, their own expertise into discussing deeply elements of wildlife protection and biodiversity. So some of these examples or initiatives to collaborate on the conservation of wildlife is our own strategy for the decade of ecosystem restoration. You know that UNEP and FAO co-chairs the decade on ecosystem restoration. We have probably today more than 200 partners for the decade of ecosystem restoration, with action plans, with projects and programs to implement the decade of ecosystem strategy. We came from a faith perspective, and we aligned that with the overall strategy and provided some guidance in a strategy for the engagement of faith actors. The Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, another program of UNEP, implemented by different partners across the globe, but it is focusing on 5 countries which have most of the rainforest areas in the world. And the main concept and main objective of this program is to engage local communities, indigenous people, and faith actors in the conservation of wildlife and within the rainforest areas. The Green Faith Initiative, for example, works with local religious communities to take action on environmental issues and by organizing education, advocacy, and so on. There are others like the Buddhist Chi Foundation Environmental Program, the Islamic Foundation for Ecology, IFES, initiatives on promoting sustainable biodiversity conservation. And there is an important working group or community called Faith for Biodiversity, which many of the faith-based organizations are members of, and is leading the work or the engagement of faith organizations on biodiversity and wildlife. Now, the engagement on wildlife protection comes part, or the faith engagement comes part of the One Health initiative. And that is for many reasons. For example, it brings in the moral and ethical frameworks for the conservation and for addressing the interconnectedness between all living beings and how that leads to safeguarding and keeping the wildlife. The mobilization of communities, faith leaders, faith actors in the engagement strategy through sermons, through teachings, through rituals and events undertaken by faith actors. And of course, some of the initiatives for partnerships addressing the impact of wildlife conservation and wildlife abuse and the health of animals, but also the health of the people. And all of that must lead to changing the lifestyle and behavior of the people towards the conservation efforts and protection of the health of the people, but also the health of the planet. So, and if you remember in 2019 and 2020, when we were hit by the pandemic, by COVID-19, faith organizations were not only proactively engaged, but they were approached by governments, by UN organizations and international organizations to take the lead in preventing the spread of COVID-19, but specifically on the religious approach to wildlife. And as you know, so many theories on the genesis of COVID-19 and the zoonotic type of it, and why the the mismanagement or the wrong interactions with wildlife has led or is leading. And this year they've had the WHO conference on zoonotics and other pandemics that are expected because of the interaction between humans and nature or wildlife. So there are some case studies for the engagement and the protection. For example, the JIFA, which is the Jewish Initiative for Animals, on the welfare of and its ethical consumption and practices within the Jewish community of wildlife. There is a movement for the Catholics, the Catholic Concern for Animals, which is leading advocacy, awareness, and actually providing some scientific references for the wildlife protection. Again, there's another one which is from an interfaith perspective, the Animal Interfaith Alliance, again bringing along some understanding and knowledge, combining the wisdom of religions to the scientific evidence and scientific take on wildlife protection. From UNEP, I will not delve into the legal aspects of how we are engaged in decision-making, policy-making, the legal aspects of environmental governance, but only from an awareness perspective. And we have launched many years ago the Wild for Life campaign, which mobilizes the international community to consider the wildlife conservation and protection by supporting not only governments, but also individuals, communities, different civil society sectors in the conservation campaigns and providing the scientific evidence, but also working on the One Health aspect of it. The health of the planet is equivalent or is as important as the health of people, and providing, of course, some guidelines on the choices that individuals should take in conserving wildlife and biodiversity. I think this is it. Thank you for listening, and back to you, Anne-Kristen.
Yes, thank you so much for this great presentation. I think it gave a very insightful overview of the interconnectedness of how to harness, as also the title said, religion for environmental conservation, how the different aspects that we can find in different religions and that relate to each other, that actually are very similar, and how to organize the coexistence of societies and the environment and animals and wildlife. Also especially I think the interplay or the connection between religion and science, that was very interesting to me also, because I feel like often it kind of feels like it's two different things, and they really have to go into dialogue with each other to kind of find how to collaborate. But I think you really showed that it's actually not that opposite, that there is actually a lot of potential to work together. I would like to invite everyone to raise their questions, basically. I'm going to check in the chat, but otherwise, please raise your hand, unmute yourself, and directly post your questions if you have them. Otherwise, also feel free to use the chat, and I can read out your question as well. Yes, I can see in the chat. Yes, the recording will be shared. You will be able to access that in the members area of the Alliance website. And I think also Dr. Abumoghli is going to share it as well. So you can follow him as well, or us, and register. Are there any questions right now? Because then I would like to give the floor to you. Don't be shy to raise your hand. Yes. Patrizia Tehel, please unmute yourself.
Hi. So I have a question on specifically the other way that actually nature and wildlife and even nature-based tourism is almost like nature-based pilgrimage, because we as humans get spiritual connection when we are out in nature and biodiversity. And specifically with COVID, one of the major things that happened is people got connected back to nature because they didn't have that social communication with the other people and relationships. And I think it's really important to highlight that nature is basically a service to us, and it provides us a spirituality to actually reconnect our values in life and our morals. So it's also the other side to bring it in. And also on wildlife trade and wildlife and One Health, and people look at wildlife trade and victims of wildlife, but also in tourism as well, because that's my sector. Seeing an animal in a cage and seeing it not as a trade. Like they think, okay, trade means a dead animal, a piece of part, or an animal somewhere, but also animals that are held in captivity for our own pleasure. So there's the pleasure that we get from just being in nature and that spiritual connection that gives us that, and also a responsibility toward animals, and not just trafficking animals, but also the animals that we put in captivity as humans.
Thank you, Patricia. I don't think this is a question. I think this is a marvelous contribution. I very much appreciate it, and I cannot agree more with you. I would like to add that from UNEP's perspective and from the Faith for Earth Coalition perspective, we have, understood the relationship between rituals, including religious tourism, or pilgrimage, or whatever you call it, and of course nature conservation. Soon, hopefully, we will launch some guidance book on faith and sustainable festivals and rituals. So it is sort of our contribution. Of course, it's not we coming up with irrelevant guidance, but we have consulted almost all religions on how do they approach sustainably their festivals. For example, Hajj, how they contribute to reducing Christmas waste, Ramadan waste, and so on and so forth. This is very important. Another program that we have launched 2 years ago, and we are working with the University of Connecticut on that, is the Mindfulness for Earth program, which is the spiritual connection between humans and their nature, and how it impacts the behavior and practices of people. Again, as you mentioned, the spiritual connection is very important in that aspect. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. If there are any other questions, please also just raise your hand, or maybe someone else has certain experiences that they would like to share. Then also you're very welcome to do that as well. And we can also discuss different experiences. Otherwise, maybe yet if you have more information on how, because you were talking about the faith events also at COP15, how was the dialogue? Like, how did people perceive the different topics that were represented at the COP? Do you maybe can share some of the experiences?
Yes, indeed. I mean, in COP15, but also COP28 on climate change, because, biodiversity and climate change are two sides of the same coin, which is environmental degradation, either through biodiversity destruction and the threat to biodiversity resources, but also climate change and its impact on ecosystem and biodiversity. And UNEP with partners have been leading a, pre-COP, at COP, and post-COP engagement And when we start the discussion and how we contribute to any of the COPs, for example, COP15 on biodiversity, we did not only say, we should say that it is sacred and what have you, but we went into detailed review, word by word, of the global biodiversity framework, and contributed the perspectives of religions and also scientifically and how we see it and why it is 30%, 30 by 30 or 20 by 40 or what have you. So even the discussions went deep into that. And the issue, another thing that we went into the priority listing of what the COP is aimed to achieve. For example, in COP 28, they wanted the integration of all systems together. So biodiversity, desertification, climate change, and so on. So we discussed that from a scientific point of view. Also, we went into financing, for example, for the restoration of ecosystems and how organizations can contribute. So the diversity, in fact, in COP15, we had 26 sessions. In COP28, we had 70 plus sessions by faith actors, hundreds of speakers talking about different aspects of religions and the elements of environmental resources. So it is not, if we keep telling the story, people will be amazed of how engaged faith organizations are on those global policy issues that lead to the protection of the environment and nature and wildlife.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I also think, because of course, like relating it also to the One Health perspective, it offers like a very holistic perspective as well, right? Like, the different sciences that discuss with each other, and then also the religious view on things and how to approach societies, communities. So I think that's a very important perspective that, very exciting to see that's growing. We have another question in the chat by Masha. I don't know if you maybe want to unmute yourself and pose it yourself. Otherwise, I can also read it out.
I hope it's quiet enough around me. So I was wondering, you mentioned like positive examples, how also sometimes specific species can be protected or like have more value compared to others. And I was just wondering, are there also maybe examples where it's the opposite actually, where we have an issue where specific species are demonized or are being used from a faith perspective or with a faith approach, and that could be harmful for the whole population or for, I don't know, smaller population of the whole species. So maybe you have some examples and also ideas how to deal with this.
Well, indeed, Masha, there are some species that are recognized by religions having spiritual values, and they go into their own rituals, whether by burning them or by boiling and drinking them or eating them or using them as, cream on their bodies and so on. But amazingly enough, they have learned over centuries of how to conserve these species. To my knowledge, I don't think that any of these practices have led to, abusing those resources, because, we keep talking about nature-based solutions. Actually, these are faith-based solutions because they need those resources, they need those species. So once they or when they need them, they grow them specifically for their own needs. Now, the only problem is jumping by commercial entities on the wagon of such spiritual practice. So some private sector companies coming to make profit then, you might have an overconsumption of such resources, and that is something not by faith communities, but by those wanting to profit, like anything else. When it comes to greed and commercializing practices, then you get into trouble and into threatening the biodiversity and species that you are dealing with.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. We have another question from the chat by Patricia. Feel free to unmute yourself again and pose it directly. Otherwise, I'm also happy to read it out, but yes.
Yeah, just on the advocacy part of indigenous cultures and having their rituals and traditions, conservation very often shuts them out of lands when it's under the guise of conservation. That's now changing, but we really need these faith-based organizations to advocate for a way to balance, because the old fortress conservation of take humans out of nature because they're destroying it to bringing them back in, and specifically for these rituals and faith-based events that have access to protected areas. Do you have a plan for that kind of advocacy?
Definitely, Patricia. As I mentioned, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative specifically focuses on the engagement of indigenous people in the conservation of rainforests. And over the past 6 years, or actually 7 years now, with the support of Norway, we have been able to reach out in almost 15 languages, and some local languages that are not spoken globally, but specifically community languages. Because those communities, as you mentioned, they own and they manage those important biodiversity resources. So working with them on bringing about those practices to the decision makers, because decision makers, when they in the Amazon area, for example, they still developing that area. They want to have industries or even agricultural areas for the production of oil, or so they go into these areas and destroy. But bringing the centuries-old practices, indigenous practice, there have been a major advocacy campaigns. Now, in many cases, it has been successful. In other cases, it's just the decision of one elected person or non-elected or politician that destroys everything. So it's a continuous thing that we and our partners are doing, and it has to continue. And as I mentioned in my presentation, in Agenda 21, it is mentioned specifically that indigenous and cultural knowledge is very important for the conservation of the environment, because this is hundreds of years practices. Most of the time, 99% of the time, good and positive practices towards the environment. Look at the water conservation practices and how water is channeled using primitive technologies, but very effective. Water harvesting, for example, this is very important for biodiversity protection. And all of those we learned from indigenous practices. So we are bringing that back. And one of the ways we are bringing that about is we have created a platform, a knowledge platform, in partnership with the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. If you go to the platform on their website, you will find lists of, now I think there are 95 excellent examples of local practices based on indigenous knowledge and religious perspectives on how they contribute to whether water conservation, biodiversity, climate change, and so on. So we're trying to compile all of that and present it to policymakers and decisions when they are discussed.
You're still muted, Patricia.
Fantastic, wonderful. It's really, I'll follow that up for sure.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions maybe? In the chat, feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself. Otherwise, I might have a little follow-up question on what we just discussed, because you were also talking about concrete campaigns and initiatives that are out there, and also right now we were talking about, you know, politics and economics. And if you engage in those campaigns or initiatives, what would you say is maybe like the biggest obstacle that you encounter for the successes? Maybe, yeah, what is maybe like the factors that you encounter that are a bit difficult to cooperate with, or that you encounter that are not easy to tackle?
I could think of two important challenges that we always face. The first one is the language barrier, because most of the organizations, global organizations, they communicate in English, some cases in French, but rarely in the languages that are spoken by local communities. We have a major problem reaching out to Latin America, for example, in Portuguese and Spanish and so on. And that deters or prevents, local players to contribute to the discussions and debates and knowledge. The second, if you read most of the international organizations' reports, when they talk about examples, they talk about examples from the West and from the North, and not examples from the South and from local communities. So we need to capture those examples. First of all, the reason for that, as I mentioned, big organizations, even faith organizations have access to financial resources to do those projects and to write about them. And rarely they go to local communities to capture these stories. This is why we have created that platform to capture those stories. So when you tell a local community about a successful story in the North, I mean, it's irrelevant to them. So they need to know about stories of similar communities. So for us, South-South collaboration is very important, and learning, South or peer learning is very important. So those two challenges. And the third obvious challenge is funding for such projects. You might find, millions and millions of dollars of funding of Global Environment Facility or Green Climate Fund, but those are mega projects, right? And they talk about global issues, and but rarely there are small grants which can go to local communities for the implementation of, if it is not their own understanding or nature-based solutions. So that prevents them from actually being able to implement or be part of the global implementation mechanism and campaign and so on. So funding is a very important challenge that we are facing.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out again, especially also, I guess, with the regional context. I think it's something that I think several initiatives struggle with, probably, to have like this language barrier and to really reach the people on the ground. Yeah, I think it's a very recurring theme. Do we maybe have another last question? Because we have 2 minutes left. So there is the last chance. If there's
some unanswered questions, or maybe someone wants to share their experiences as well, please feel free to do so right now. Otherwise,
if participants are interested in getting engaged with us, and receiving our updates, we're a very conservative organization, so we don't flood inboxes of people, but we share very important news. I have put now a link to subscribe to our newsletter and update. So if people are interested to get, or even they can write me an email personally, I would be happy to keep them informed and engaged.
yes, perfect. Thank you for that offer, very kind. Yeah, okay, great. Perfect. Well, in that case, thank you all so much for your time, and a big thank you to Dr. Iyad Abumoghli for this great presentation. I've learned a lot, and it was very insightful, and it has opened my mind to see all those synergies in those different religions and how to see spirituality also from a policy perspective. So that was very good. Thank you so much from the Alliance. Also, thank you to everyone else who joined us today. We have more events coming up in the next month, so also stay tuned for that. And yes, if there's any remaining questions or inquiries, you can obviously get into direct contact, or you can also send an email to the Alliance Secretariat, and we will also get you in touch with Dr. Abumoghli. We're very happy to connect you as well. And you can find the recording of this expert talk in the members area. So if you are already a registered member, you can find it. Otherwise, feel free to register. You will also find it through Dr. Abumoghli. So also follow him for more information. Yes, thank you so much. And I wish you a great rest of the day, morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. And yes, hopefully see you next time. Thank you again, Dr. Abumoghli. It was great having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kristen.
Soon.
Thank you, Masha, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.